Secretary and Governor, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.
You know very well, this isn't just in South Dakota. You've got plants across the country, Iowa, Pennsylvania, for instance, that are shutting down because of these health concerns. How serious of a problem is this?
Well, it's a cascading series of events here that's really disrupting the entire food chain. Basically, you start ending school lunch programs, universities shut down, food service shuts down, tourism, hotels have low occupancy. At the end of the day, you basically have a tremendous amount of the overall supply of food having to be redirected. At a time when people are feeling a little bit of a pinch in terms of the economy, many unemployed people can't access the grocery store, go to the food bank. They have a supply issue. And now you have the cascading event of these facilities not having enough workers or having sick workers and having to shut down plants. So it's obviously a very difficult circumstance and situation. That's why it's going to be important for the USDA to do what it's going to do, which is to begin the process of buying commodities, buying and supplying them to food banks so that at least a number of folks can get access to food.
You know, just anecdotally, we've seen here in the Washington, D.C. area some difficulty finding some staples like rice, for instance. I think it took me several grocery outings and to be able to find that. When or if those pantry staples, do you think that they're going to become unavailable more broadly? Flour, for instance, eggs, is that a real threat?
Well, it won't necessarily be a threat based on production. It's still going to be produced. The question is whether or not you're going to have more and more plants with sick workers and basically the decision to shut down those production facilities. At this point, there's plenty of supply and there's still processing capacity. Obviously, I think the key is not only keeping those workers healthy and safe, but also making sure that people have the resources either to go to the grocery store because you're providing unemployment checks more quickly, the stimulus money gets out more quickly, SNAP benefits get increased, or you basically provide commodities to food banks and allow for that supply chain to support people that don't have the ability to go into a store and purchase groceries. It's a combination of both.
You know some of the video that we've been seeing of milk, for instance, being dumped. The American Farm Bureau and Feeding America wrote a letter saying that farmers are throwing out food that could be going to food banks. According to the Dairy Farmers of America, there are 3.7 million gallons of milk a day that are having to be thrown out. Explain that disconnect and that upset in the supply chain for us.
Well, when you shut down schools and shut down universities, you're shutting down a supply of milk that goes on a regular basis. Where does that milk go? There isn't enough retail sales to make up for the food service and school lunch program consumption. And export markets, you're basically seeing the same situation playing out in our export markets. So the question is, how can you get that milk to the food banks so it can be distributed to people in need? Here's the problem. Because of the trade relief that the Trump administration provided because of the trade wars, the Department of Agriculture didn't have the capacity to purchase commodities until recently. That is to say, they didn't have the money to be able to do it. Congress passes that large stimulus bill, provides USDA resources, but now they have a question of how do they distribute those resources? What commodities get the benefit of those resources? They're doing it at a time when staff levels are low, either because staff positions haven't been filled or because they have people themselves who are sick or they can't even meet together. So it's a complicated situation that requires, I think, a tremendous effort by USDA to be creative. Minimize the regulation, maximize creativity so that you get product to people in need as quickly as possible.
You know, I know we're hearing about certain products that are really difficult to come by. Of course, anything that is of a disinfectant nature, including just pure isopropyl alcohol. But we're also seeing some of these food staples that are taking time to replenish. At the same time, it does seem like Americans are able to look for alternatives. I wonder broadly overall, are you worried that we could get to a point in certain areas where there is not that food that people can get, even if they have to choose an alternative, especially for people who may be food insecure and reliant on SNAP or WIC?
Well, I think there are two concerns there. I'm deeply concerned about remote rural areas in terms of being able to access product. And secondly, any place that's got a highly populated, high dense situation where you've got a lot of unemployed people, food banks are really stressed right now. 30, 40% increase in demand At the same time, they can't rely on their retail base for donations. There isn't any excess food to provide them from the retail side. So it is incredibly important to get the USDA engaged as they are in purchasing these commodities and getting them to the food banks as quickly as possible and being creative about doing it. Maybe it's backing, if a food bank doesn't have refrigeration capacity, maybe it's backing a tanker that is refrigerated to the back of a food bank and distributing out of the tanker. I mean, there's got to be creative ways to overcome the barriers and obstacles that we're faced. Otherwise, there will be shortages. And once you get to shortages, there's obviously going to be a lot of concerned, deeply concerned people. And it's just going to put more pressure on cities, states, and on the federal government.
Yeah, especially if there are refrigerated tankers not in use because of what we've seen with other supply chain interruptions. Secretary Vilsack, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
It is the group that is leading the fight against the coronavirus.